time with 30 teenagers and adults from around the diocese at the youth happening, just happening, at Casa Wasco. It's been a great few days of talking about faith and deepening our relationship with Jesus. Yesterday morning, after morning prayer, one of the presentations involved a teenager who got down on their knees and started praying the Lord's Prayer, and she prayed, "Our Father who art in heaven," and then a voice boomed over the public address system, and it was God answering her prayer and asking what she wanted, and she was clearly thrown by this. This hadn't happened before, and so it went throughout the prayer. She prayed, "Hallowed be thy name," and God asked her, "What does that mean?" And the teen said, "Well, I don't actually really know. What does it mean?" And God explained that hallowed means holy. She prayed, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And God said, "Do you really mean that?" And she thought for a minute or two, and she said, "Yeah, I mean, sure, I guess so." And God asked, "So what are you doing about that?" She's like, I don't know. She got along to the lines of, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And God started questioning her on all of the people in her life that she hasn't forgiven. And finally, the teen just kind of blows up and she says, "Look, I'm just trying to get through my prayer. I do this every day. It feels religious and holy. I'm not really looking to go into this in depth. I need to get on with the rest of the day." This is what happens when God actually shows up and answers our prayers. And this is what's happening in our lesson from Job today. You recall this is the third of the series of readings we've had from the book of Job over the last few weeks. Remember that Job is a righteous and just man. He does nothing wrong in the sight of God, and God has blessed him richly. He has great wealth. He has many, many cattle. He has servants. He has a great house. He has a large family. Satan challenges God and says, "Look, of course Job praises your name, but if you take away everything that you've given to him, you take away his possessions and his wealth and his family and his health, he will curse you to your face." And God says, "Okay, do your worst." Satan does, and still Job stays faithful. Job says, "The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." That's the first two chapters of the book of Job. And then for 36 chapters, Job cries out to God and has sort of a conversation with his friends about why it is that this evil has befallen him. His friends are convinced that Job unknowingly or maybe secretly or accidentally has done something wrong, and that is why he's being punished. Job is absolutely certain that he is innocent, and what he wants more than anything else, and he prays over and over again, cries out to God to come and appear to Job so that he can make his case. And knowing that he is innocent, Job is convinced that once he makes his case, God will hear it, know that God has made a mistake, and restore his fortunes, restore his good health. He gets his prayer answered. God shows up. But God does not answer Job's questions. Instead, over the course of 2 chapters, God peppers Job with questions of God's own. 60 questions, starting with, "Who are you?" And going on with, "Where were you when I created the universe? When I set its foundations? Who are you to question me? Are you able to count the number of stars in the sky? Are you able to control the lightning? Are you in charge of creation?" 60 questions without even taking a breath. At the end of which, Job is silent. He says, "I have spoken when I should not have spoken." It's maybe not a completely satisfying answer to the question that the book of Job poses. Why do bad things happen to good people? William Sloane Coffin, who later in life became the senior minister at Riverside Church in New York City. As a young man, 3 of his college friends were killed in a tragic car accident. And he went to the funeral, and he got really angry with the priest, because during his homily, the priest said about this tragedy, "The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." William Sloane Coffin was so angry, he considered tripping the priest on his way out of the church. He ultimately decided not to do that, but he was a reflective young man, headed on his way towards ordination. And as he reflected, he tried to figure out what made him so angry that the priest should say that. After all, William thought to himself, he ultimately did believe that. And he thought, what must be the part where the Lord taketh away that was upsetting him so much? And then, Coffin writes, it hit him like a ton of bricks. It was actually that the Lord giveth. It was the realization that everything that he had in this life, including his life, had been given to him by God. And the reason that made him angry is because it meant that he was not in control, that God was in control. The problem with the question that we ask about why bad things happen to good people is that by asking that question, we are making God in our own image. We're making God into sort of a super perfect human being who has the same concerns and worldview as we do, who has the same sense of justice and fairness that we do. We are putting God in a human-sized box. We are envisioning God as created in our image. These 60 questions that God peppers Job with remind us that God is not made in our image. We are created and made in God's image. And God not only has created us, but has created this whole marvelous universe that we live in. God's concerns are on a whole different plane than human concerns. In fact, they go beyond human understanding. A couple weeks ago, I heard a commentary on NPR by Adam Frank, who is a professor of astrophysics at the University of Rochester. He normally writes and talks about the magnificence of the universe, how amazing it is, the number of galaxies beyond our ability to count, the number of stars out there, the immense distances between us and everything else in the universe. For a scientist, he's a pretty poetic speaker and writer, and I liked him a lot. For this commentary, though, he wasn't looking at the night sky, but rather at kind of a more humble, more down-to-earth miracle. He suggests going out in the woods, and do this soon before the ground freezes, and picking up a fistful of dirt. He says if you had a microscope and you looked at that fistful of dirt, you would find more microbes in that fistful of dirt than there are stars in our galaxy. That dirt is made up of bits of clay and leaves and decaying matter of all sorts. And in between those bits of earth, in the spaces between those, are billions and trillions of microbes that make that fistful of earth really a living organism, out of which other living things grow. It's a miracle just in your very fist, a miracle that you can reach out and hold. It is the miracle of the creation in which we live. Adam Frank says there is good news in the universe, you just have to look at some dirt to find it. On any weekend with a bunch of teenagers, you're going to find a fair amount of angst. This weekend's been no exception to that. And yesterday, in the early afternoon, we were going through a moment of a fair amount of kind of normal teenage angst, and we were walking across the camp, and it was before the rains arrived. The sky was beautiful and blue, the sun was shining. As I looked out over the lake, there were several V's of geese making practice runs across the lake, getting ready for migration. And I was reminded of a poem by Mary Oliver titled Wild Geese, and in it she writes, "Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again." Now, I am not recommending that you tell your teenage children and grandchildren that their angst means nothing because look at the wild geese. That will get you nowhere. Their angst is very real to them. It needs to be dealt with in a real way. I would not tell you to tell your relatives, your friends, or yourself when you're going through suffering or evil times in this life that they mean nothing because the wild geese are flying home. Your suffering is real. God walks with you in your suffering. God can bring good even out of your suffering. That is the witness of our Christian faith. The good news of the book of Job, I think, is that God is the master of creation. That God is bigger than you or I. That God is not made in our image. That this gift and this world and this universe we live in is a gift of the very highest order. That is the good news of the book of Job. It is good news for us today and every day. Amen.
Amen.